I am extremely pleased and very privileged to introduce our speakers, Amanda Plimpton, Sarah Ware, and Tessa Alexanian. So here we go. So Amanda is the COO of Livestock Labs, which does some really amazing work with implants for cattle, really pioneering a whole new field here for agriculture, for research. Tessa is works at iGEM for the Safety and Security Committee. I think that's correct. Sorry, Tessa, if that's not, you can correct me. But she is really interested in pioneering this idea of responsible disclosure within this community, which is something I think a topic that has percolated for a long time, but that we have not specifically discussed at BioSummit in the past couple of years. So this is really exciting. And then finally, Sarah Ware, who is the leader of Bioblaze, a community lab outside of Chicago. And Sarah is my colleague on a couple of other ethics initiatives that we are working on. And so I'm really excited to present these folks to you. And with that, I will let them take it away. So Sarah and Amanda, go ahead.
Hello. Thanks everybody for coming. We really appreciate you being here and are looking forward to your input. And like Todd and Dan were mentioning earlier in the session with their biosafety handbook, they've taken it to a certain point and now it's time for us they're handing it over, and the community needs to tweak it and make it our own. And so this is the same idea with our track here. So I'm just going to see if I can share my screen real quick and see if I can make this big. 1 second. Okay, so what we want to talk about today is twofold, but these things overlap, like with biosafety, and so we'll be talking about some biosecurity and some bioethics stuff today. So we've combined those with our working title, Building a Culture of Responsible Disclosure and Peer Review. So the topic for this year is governance, and governance needs infrastructure, and so our infrastructure needs to be community-led. We know that's the only way that this works in this community. No one can be the leader. No one wants to have a leader. And so the community needs to lead. And I have this place marker, but I'm going to see if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, I'm going to just go on. But I wanted to see about sharing real quick. Probably I just need to go back to sharing my screen. And I want to see if I can find it. If not, then it's okay. Okay, never mind. Well, this is a link to the Hello World session from the first BioSummit 2017. And I was revisiting my Hello World presentation. That was the first year that BioSummit was a thing. It was right after I heard of this whole big global community, and I was just in my little home lab doing my home lab thing and not thinking anyone else was doing that kind of thing.
Daddy, who do you want to be? Daddy,
and then all of a sudden, I know I got my kids at the house too. So anyway, I was looking at this, and when I did my Hello World, it was kind of surprising to see, because I was saying, pretty soon I hope to start a community lab in a makerspace in St. Charles, Illinois. And the next month I did that. And so I just want to bring that in to mention that these kind of infrastructures, it's not us against you or something like that. It's like, I want this infrastructure. I'm in this community and I have a community lab, and I want these kind of things. And I hope that it feels like a team thing and that it's something good for our community. So the things let's not do, we're not telling people what you can and can't do. You can't do that anyway in this community. We want to make this fit with the community. So our infrastructure that we're proposing, we need to make it our own, just like with the biosafety manual. And we want to just, you know, continue to share ideas and propel our ideas even further than just like maybe slipping it under the table to help a friend or something like that. Like the idea is to create a bridge to cross this huge ravine that can be like going from idea to actually getting your idea taken seriously. If you maybe don't have an MD or a PhD, how do we do that? And we want to try to create bridges and tools for our community to use or not use, depending on what you want to do with it. So these intersecting ideas for infrastructure, biosafety, biosecurity, and bioethics. And so I've already noted that earlier in the day, listening to some other talks, all of these things were already being discussed. So, I mean, these things are interwoven in our community already. And we just kind of want to take that and take it a little further. So this morning, of course, with biosafety, we heard, and then just right before this session, Todd and Dan talking about the biosafety handbook. This morning also, Kevin Esvelt was talking about biosecurity issues. So Tessa is going to be giving a presentation on the culture of responsible disclosure related to biosecurity. And then bioethics, I heard earlier Manu Prakash, hopefully you're saying that name right. But he brought in some bioethics ideas into his frugal science session. So all of these things we're already talking about as a community. We just kind of want to get your feedback on where do you think this might fit in with your projects, and do some breakout sessions and get your input. So Tessa will talk about how do we build a culture of responsible disclosure. And then Amanda will talk about this new idea, this thing that we are forming as we speak. We're calling it CLEAR, and we want to build a Biohacker IRB, institutional review board, maybe in the future. But right now we want to just have it a little more informal, so that we can do peer review if people want that. So please, we already have a very new website on CLEAR, the idea about having this peer review board. Please check it out, and please sign the mailing list and let us know if you're interested in helping shape this further after today, which we hope you are. So we're going to have the 2 talks and then do some breakout discussions and then regroup. So like last session, please assign someone in your group to report back a short summary. And I would like to turn it over to Tessa.
All right, Sarah, thanks so much for setting that up.
Do you want me to just advance the slides, or do you want me to
I'll just take over the screen sharing. That should.
Okay, let me stop then. All right.
All right. And just also a quick note, since this happens to be the tab I have open, we do have a space in the participant Google Drive. We're not actually planning to take notes in Google Drive, but you'll see links to the notes that we are taking showing up in the chat and whatnot. And if you want to follow along any of these links that are in the slides, those slides are linked in there too. So presenting from the start of this talk, come now Firefox, please cooperate with me. Are we gonna go full screen? Moments from giving up on this. All right, well, you're just gonna have to see the sides of the Google Drive, and that's something we can accept. You get a little preview of the slides on the side. Anyway, I'm Tessa. It has been nice to meet some of you over the course of this weekend. I recently started working for iGEM on their safety and security program. And so something that's been on my mind a lot is how to provide guidance to all of these student teams and community teams that go out and speak about synthetic biology around the world. You know, we think a lot about building a culture of responsibility, and I find often in discussions of biosecurity that phrase comes up a lot and it's not necessarily well defined. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what I mean when I say a culture of responsible disclosure. And it's really about balancing some different things, some different values that I think all of us care about. So, it's about balancing making sure that we are being careful around vulnerabilities with making sure that we are creating space for accountability. And I'll talk a bit more about what I mean by that shortly. It's about balancing potential risks to the biosphere with our desire to make progress through open collaboration. And it's also about balancing optimism and excitement about our projects with honesty about our limitations. So let's briefly go into each of those in turn. So vulnerability and accountability. This is probably what you see kind of most frequently in the more traditional kind of cyber hacking space. So if you come across a security flaw in a system, what do you do about that? And there's this norm of responsible disclosure, which says that you try to get in touch with the maintainers of the system first and say, hey, I found this flaw. Can you fix it? Can you patch it at all? And I pulled in this accountability word because often a really important part of that conversation is saying, if you don't patch it, we will go public with it in 90 days or in 6 months. And so there has to be this balance of the accountability to make sure that these systems get fixed and the desire not to create new vulnerabilities. And so, an example of that is hacking insulin pumps. So some diabetic security researchers realized that the communication protocol on their own insulin pumps was insecure. They tried to communicate with the manufacturer, their concerns were downplayed. And so, they were sort of struggling to decide what to do, and eventually they decided to go public with the name of the device and the name of the manufacturer, but not the details of the security flaw. And in this particular situation, that was enough to kind of nudge the manufacturer to fix the security flaw. And this is a picture from the DEF CON Biohacking Village where there's kind of a medical device hacking lab. So I think there are getting to be better relationships between medical device hackers and the manufacturers of these devices, such that hopefully they won't get so downplayed in the future. Another case study is sort of more traditional dual use research. So researchers publishing data on how to synthesize a virus from small fragments. I kind of find this funny because often in cybersecurity discussions, I see people assuming that bio has this figured out. They're like, oh, well, if you knew how to make a virus, you wouldn't just publish that. And I'm like, oh, absolutely, people do that. And this is an example of dual use research where these researchers really wanted to help create a vaccine, but in so doing and in publishing their work about this, they were also creating a new vulnerability because they were sharing instructions for viral synthesis. And so, and this kind of, goes back to what Kevin Aswell was saying this morning. We sort of have to watch how we communicate because there are these very large risks to the biosphere. And in the two cases I outlined earlier, I'd say both with the medical device and with the way that we're screening sequences for synthesis, there's sort of an opportunity to patch that vulnerability. But we may uncover vulnerabilities to the biosphere that aren't patchable. It's just, life has evolved with a certain set of vulnerabilities which we may discover. And if we discover those, how do we communicate about that in a way that balances our hope for developing a patch, which is open science and collaborative progress, and protecting the biosphere from potential careless actors. So, what we learn, what we discover can touch the living things around the world. We want to demonstrate care for them. And we probably don't want the most risk-tolerant person to get to decide what becomes public because, and again, this is just echoing what Kevin said this morning, but you can unilaterally decide to make something public, and we probably want to try to find a way to do that in a more collaborative fashion. Some alternatives to full disclosure. This is actually borrowed largely from work on people working about disclosure and fairness in artificial intelligence. So these are also people working on kind of cutting edge new technologies that could have really big societal impacts. How do you decide how to communicate about them? And so just a couple of alternatives here. One option is to discover something and then decide, okay, I'm going to delay a bit in either my research group or my friends or other people who limited sets of people who I talk to maybe have some time to adapt to this thing that I've discovered. You have an option to maybe share with people you trust or reviewers first, and I think this will come up a lot in what Amanda's about to talk about with Clear. You can try some kind of ask for access policy. So you say, hey, I found this thing, it's pretty neat. If you want the details of my methods, you have to contact me, shoot me an email or something. And another thing is you can maybe change your emphasis or framing. So, and you know, Kevin mentioned all of his early papers about chain drives. They were framed around how do you mitigate the risks from this? How do you be defensive? So you can also notice maybe a vulnerability that you found and choose to direct your attention and the attention of the people who read about your discovery and who read your disclosure towards mitigating that vulnerability. And then something else that also comes up a lot in the iGEM context is this balancing of optimism and honesty. So, you know, we're all working on projects that we're really excited about that we think could really have a huge positive impact on the world. I mean, that's why we're stoked about this. That's why biology is awesome. That's why community biology is awesome. But often these projects are far away from a practical solution, and we want to have trust between labs, between practitioners, but across broader communities. You know, I think we see this sometimes where we'll have iGEM students who want to go out and interview patients for this potential therapeutic that they're developing. And we're excited about that, but we also say, hey, make sure as you're talking about this, you're not suggesting that you've solved this problem for these people. It's just that you're working on an idea. Or another case study that we'll be talking about later in this session is you know, DIY vaccines, where I'm personally really in favor of giving people autonomy over their medical care. But this might be a case where there's kind of harming of this sort of commons of trust around vaccination in general, especially in cases like DIY vaccines, where with manufacturing limitations, it may not actually be achieving a sort of broader goal of equality of access. And I'm really looking forward to the 15-minute fireside chat on this later. So I guess the question that I hit then is, okay, infrastructures, tools, how could we help with this problem of how to responsibly disclose things that we discover, and how to balance this vulnerability, accountability, biosphere, collaboration, optimism, honesty. And so, you know, just brainstorming, and we'll get to talk about this in the breakout sessions. You know, could we be developing communication guidelines? Could we have some kind of toolkit for these alternatives to full disclosure that I discussed? Do we want to do peer review before we ever share our work, or before we share certain kinds of work? Do we want a panel that we could go to say, hey, I think there might be some risks in my work, or there might be some like long run impacts that I haven't really thought of. Could you take a look at it? Do we want the return of the Ask a Biosafety Expert program that Todd talked about in the morning? Here are a ton of questions that you could help me with. And I will pause here because the Q&A part of this is both me asking you these questions and you asking me questions. So brief pause for that. And I'm not sure exactly how much time we have for questions.
So this is great, Tessa. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. So we are running a little bit behind. We've got 20 minutes. So I thought maybe we could do, let's do 2 to 3 minutes of Q&A. Maybe we can take 2 questions on yours, then we'll move on to Amanda. And we'll do a couple of questions on Amanda's presentation and sort of both as a whole before we move on. Does that sound okay to everyone?
That sounds good. If we also want to gather questions at the end, you know, we could go straight into Amanda's presentation now.
Well, let's see if there are any urgent questions about Tessa's presentation or comments. Kevin, you're in the chat. Did you want to add anything? Nope.
All right, should we hand over to Amanda then?
Cool. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go, Amanda.
I did have one question, but you don't. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Lucas.
I just was kind of curious. So I like the idea of having peer and expert review, and I think it's a very important point to make. The trouble I would have is if you have a very intersectional idea and you're not sure exactly who to bring it to, do you think it'd be useful to have a group of collaborators that you can always talk to, like, hey, I have this idea, who should I talk to? Or is that a bad idea because you're sending this idea to a bunch of unrelated collaborators, and that might be another route for this information to get exposed?
Yeah, I think the idea of sort of like cross-cutting is super important too. I know my friend Rosie, who's working on this stuff in the AI context, she was trying to put together a panel to review potential AI research, and she's like, man, I feel like we need, you know, historians and sociologists, and she's actually probably going to bring some science fiction authors onto her panel as well, just because she was like, they're really good at thinking about the long run future. So So maybe we need those folks as well. So yeah, I think you're right that there's kind of this tension between not wanting to broadcast something that you're concerned about, and also wanting to make sure you get a diversity of opinions, because it's really easy to miss things. And so yeah, I guess that's some of what I'm interested in talking about, is what would be a good makeup of people you could go to. Should you have sort of a smaller circle of your personal trust, or do we instead have this kind of trusted panel that's, you know, maybe some kind of institution that we're trying to build, like the one you're about to hear about. But yeah, good, solid points.
Okay, great. Amanda, all you.
All right, let's see if I can share this or not. Have it go well. Okay. So in terms of CLEAR, we've been talking about building a Biohacker IRB for a while. I think 2019 is when it really started to gather some momentum, and a group started to kind of coalesce around the idea that it would be good for the community to have peer review and an IRB and a way, and then it kind of broke out into two things were coming out of that as the discussion started to evolve as we went to different conventions and had different conversations online and via different communication tools. And that's that one of the purposes of an IRB would be to help provide access to resources that we normally wouldn't have, institutional resources that someone who's in more of a community science role wouldn't normally have access to. And then the other is that it's an opportunity to start developing the actual peer review process that makes science science. If you just do stuff, that's just screwing around. If you write it down, that's the start of doing science. If you have it peer reviewed and you get that validation around it, then you're doing good science. And we want to get people to that point. And so we're looking at this point at having a more informal version of an institutional review board. The IRBs kind of go in from formal to informal, with more external to internal, as the little diagram shows. And we're kind of in the middle of the informal range, heading towards formal. We want to start with something that's peer reviewed. It's easier for us to set up. We make available to the community, start producing that good body of work for the community that we need. And that will give us time to start growing out those resources that we need in order to produce a more formal IRB that could hold its own against all of the other institutional IRBs. And so we wanted to start there. The name is the Community-Led Ethics and Assessment Review Board, CLEAR, trying to keep it fairly concise. And it's for biohacking. And who's a biohacker? You are. If you are here, you are a biohacker. It's for scientists who are in a non-institutional setting. You're not a commercial scientist, you're not an academic, but you're a scientist doing science. And if you're doing science, that makes you a scientist. So it's you. The academics, the people who are in everything from homeschooling all the way through trying to finish up their PhD. Anyone who's got that great idea but doesn't have access to a lab, doesn't have the thousands of dollars to go to a different IRB that's commercially available to the community. It's for all of the labs that are out there that are like Bioblaze and the others that have formed or are trying to form, or even if you've got your own little bedroom that's been converted into a lab, you're doing work there. And it would be, you're a biohacker who might need access to CLEAR, and it would help provide that integrity and robustness for projects. It gets you the peer review, it's an assessment, it's helping for people who are newer to what they're doing to be able to come in and say, hey, does this look like it's designed well? And they can get feedback on that before they even move forward in the process to make sure that they get that quality outcomes after all. It's helping dispel the negative perceptions that might be around biohacking. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of any of the negative perceptions around us, but they are out there. And then as we build and demonstrate how well we're doing with the peer review process, we'll be able to unlock more of access to institutional resources with universities, pharma, funding, hopefully grants, and the potential help for clinical trials for biohackers in the future as they get to those stages and the IRB grows to that stage as well. There's a lot of potential there. And so what we want to do today is talk about the idea of who are our peers and who are these experts that should be reviewing and who do we not want to have reviewing. We want to get input from the community on what that looks like, as well as when you would use CLEAR and what would you look for a review or an assessment. We're trying to pull from the community and bring people in from the community to help us form this core mission statement of what CLEAR should be doing for the community. And then that will help us guide us in that development, that architecting of the organization as we move forward. That's it. Let's talk.
Okay, great. Thank you, Amanda. That's really exciting. Considering the name CLEAR only came out like this week. This is a super new idea. And, you know, I think that a lot of folks here are interested to learn more about this process, the idea behind it, the naming convention, how that was chosen. And, you know, in regards to how it intersects with Tessa's ideas about biosecurity, I think that's really important too. So let's open it up for, what have we got? A few minutes of, 10 minutes of group discussion here. Anyone who wants to speak, you can unmute. And then we'll break off into, I think we said 2 groups, was that right? One for Tessa and one for Amanda and Sarah. Right. And we're just gonna assign those randomly. And I think whichever group you end up in, that's the topic that we'll be discussing, but the moderators will have an agenda for the breakout session. So hopefully everyone is okay with that. And I'll just open it up for anyone who wants to have anything to say. Thank you so much to both of you, and Sarah, by the way, all 3 of you, thanks.
So I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Sure.
go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, so I'm Max Melman from Case Western Reserve University, and I wonder if in the discussions about CLEAR and informal peer review, if there was any discussion about whether the results of these peer reviews could be shared with the community so that lessons could be learned by others?
There has been some talk of that, and it's somewhat dependent on individual. If the individual has come to us in like a private capacity wanting to improve their project, that wouldn't be something that would be shared externally, but it would be asked if they wanted to be able to talk about it externally and essentially make an example or find a way to help others, then, and they agreed to it, we would be open to doing that then.
Yeah, interestingly, we already have some proposals, I mean preliminary proposals submitted to go through this process once we get it more solidified. And I think that those, I mean, they've been presented in a way that they are to have this be a learning process. And so I think that those would be open to the community to see how those were assessed. And it's kind of interesting because they were presented by the same person, but with the idea, with the saying, I hope one of these is approved and I hope one is not approved. And how would each of those look and what would the comments be?
So Ryan here, and I just wanted to raise something that I think we've had in conversations every time we've talked about this. And I don't know if any progress has been made on it, but I'd love to hear if there has been. And that is the question of possible liability. And I can think of that in a couple of ways. One would be that someone brings a project to CLEAR, CLEAR gives them the go ahead, and then something goes wrong. Is CLEAR possibly liable for anything there? And the other option is someone brings something to CLEAR that is unethical, problematic in other ways. What responsibility does CLEAR have to make sure that doesn't happen or report it to the appropriate authorities? So that's not really a question, more of just a thought to put out there.
I mean, I can respond at least to the part about liability because so with Todd and Dan, they had something called Ask a Biosafety Expert. And so we thought it would be a good idea to ask about that and how the liability worked with those volunteers. that were giving biosafety recommendations, and it turned out they did get insurance. And that was one of the reasons that it didn't go longer than it did, was because the policy ended after a year. But that was something that they had thankfully already faced, and that we have as a model for our system moving forward. So hopefully, I mean, I don't know if Todd's on here, but according to him, it was like a year before they even found a company that would write the policy for Ask a Biosafety Expert. And so, I mean, maybe then it's easy if there's still a company, maybe we could just say, hey, do the same kind of thing for us.
I have a question about the name and the acronym, including the word biohacker, where, you know, I think that Amanda is really correct when she touches on the sort of associations, some of them quite negative, with the word biohacker, and that I was even part of a research group recently with colleagues at Baylor that did a series of interviews asking folks what they called themselves, and the names were all over the map, right? All over the place. There's really no agreement except for, you know, this like giant umbrella of community bio. So we're all here, we're all part of the community. We do bio, community bio. And, you know, there's been a ton of discussion about this, but is there a fear that some folks who are doing really interesting work in the community, but who maybe have a bad taste in their mouth about the word biohacker, would be turned off? And how would you approach that?
I think that's a good question. We've been talking about it as a biohacking IRB and being for biohackers and community scientists for a while. And there isn't really a better term to umbrella under for the people who are doing DIY bio and doing human augmentation and doing human enhancement and doing DIY medicine and doing all of these pieces that are overlapping sometimes but are distinct in other ways. If there is a better term that we can come up with, we should go with that. But at the moment, the biohacking covers it well. In some ways, it's a reclaiming of the name, because almost every group has a negative stereotype associated to them, and combating it by producing good work is probably one of the best ways to start.
Plus it works in the acronym, and I am always a fan of really good acronyms, especially ones that are puns. But I take your point, and I think that obviously, of course, when you or any group, not just, you know, biohackers or members of community bio or DIY bio practitioners, if anyone, any group tries to reclaim a phrase or a word or a concept, you know, that takes time and there's some turnover that's expected. And so, you know, just to the chat went crazy when I brought this up. So if anyone has anything else to say, I mean, there's a ton of really great commentary. So anyone who has anything to say, please speak up.
Yeah, I'll throw something in. So this is, oh, hold on.
Hey, Tal. Hey, Tal.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey.
So it seems like in order for something like this to, you know, to get enough buy-in, you'd need kind of institutional supporters, both for like outreach purposes and sort of like the resources that can be put behind this, you know, kind of like the carrot of the carrot stick mentality, as well as because if there's no kind of institutional backer, then it's very, very hard to get additional people involved without following that sort of track. Do you have any particular players in mind and or players already committed?
Is the question, do we have institutions backing this?
Well, kind of. And again, I realize it's probably a little early to be asking this question after considering, but has that been given thought, kind of the idea of having institutional supporters here, and what kinds of players would be, I guess, the targets that are in mind at the moment, if that's a conversation that's happened?
It has repeatedly, yeah. That's part of the question for the discussion is, should we be inviting the institutions in, and in what role? And how does that all work together? Some people would not receive feedback from an institution very well because of how institutions have treated them. So it wouldn't be necessarily something that everyone would want. That's one of the reasons we're asking, who do you want as peer review? Who do you consider to be, good for an expert peer review? Who's, is institutional okay? These are the questions we're asking the community to get the feedback for, to see how it works. I think we've had a little bit of interest from institutions, but it is so nascent that we really haven't had anything formal come up with it. We're trying to find that way. For example, do you think that institutions should be involved?
I think that it would be a much, harder hill to climb without institutional involvement. But then the question just becomes, how do you get, I guess, enough power on the punch from institutions that that becomes beneficial, while introducing the minimum number of additional voices that have their own agendas and so on, and also introducing the minimum number of players for whom people might have a bad taste in their mouth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the other piece. Was a lot of times we're talking about people who have some amount of domain expertise, and there's a kind of a limited number of those for some of these things. So it would be interesting to try and navigate who would be willing to come on board, and what is their domain expertise, and in what capacity. Because it's, when you approach an institution, you're usually coming after an individual who has what you're looking for. So yeah, there's definitely a lot to look into there to see. Do you have any suggestions?
It's a long conversation. It's really difficult thing to sum up in a minute or two. A few thoughts right off the bat is, in terms of aligned incentives, probably better to avoid, at least at the start for the first few partners, kind of profit-seeking entities, just because that could turn into a difficult discussion. Academia is an interesting conversation because, on the one hand, that has kind of been the domain of some of the best research, actually all across science, for a pretty long time. But then there's also discussion on whether you should keep the power within the kind of the domain of the traditional, I guess, power holders, or whether you take the opportunity to shift it over to a new player. It's a hard question because the choice of institutions really determines kind of the direction of the whole thing. So
I'm gonna have to cut you off soon, so we're gonna almost be at time. But
go right ahead.
Wrap up your thought really quickly.
No, that was about it. I think I had more questions than answers here, but it's a really tough question.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're hoping we get a lot of people to sign up on the CLEAR website, and then we have a group of people who are meeting not super regularly, but maybe once every couple of months or so, to discuss this and where we're at, and to create action items. So if you are feeling like you would like to be part of that, please be part of it.
Sure. Playing for an email for that.
Rachel.
I just feel like I missed the beginning of this conversation, and that I need to really catch up somehow. What do you really want this CLEAR to do? Do you want a group of people to be advising things, some openly, some privately? They're going to say yes or no to different projects. I'm a little bit.
I think that's part of what's going to happen in the breakout rooms.
But the idea, though, is open science, right? It should be all openly documented, shared. It's not that people are going to be sending for a closed peer review to do their biohack experiments. Is that what you want? Or it's really so people can move forward with getting a CLIA lab doing COVID tests. I mean, because that, there's one thing where it really makes sense. And then there's this other thing that seems contradictory to the sort of biohacker ethic, no matter how, if they're grinders or if they're people like, for us, biohacking is really just mixing biology and technology, having a music group that's biomusic. It's a different thing. And so I feel like you guys didn't start this conversation for someone who wasn't part of the in crowd. That's all. And it's
Thank
10
you,
o'clock
Rachel.
for me.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think that's really valuable and important, especially because, you know, I think, you know, there are plenty of people who haven't been a part of this conversation or, you know, seen this same talk at various other conferences in the past, like only like 9 to 12 months. And it is very new and it's moving very fast. And
Well,
I think
it's
it's a really
super
good
cool.
point to like
I
continue.
like what Tess had to say, but I missed a lot of the sort of basic. You keep saying, we want this, and what is this?
I'm gonna sort of kind of want to take a poll here about should we do folks want to break out, or do folks feel like this is a really valuable conversation that we should stay here another 5 minutes? What are we thinking? Breakouts is what I'm seeing in the chat. Are folks okay with that? And that continue these threads of the conversations? Yeah.
Yeah, everyone seems to be keen for breakout.
Great. Okay. Then we're going to split into 2 groups, and I think Rachel should be in the Claire group. If that's possible, because I think that's really, I think you're bringing up some really excellent points. And Beth is suggesting we do smaller groups. Yeah, because there's a lot of folks in here. Desiree, what do you think? I know it's kind of last minute. We did plan on only 2.
I can reset it. I just moved people, but
Okay.
it doesn't. It depends on how people want to split up or how the leads feel comfortable moderating. Because I think we had a team before.
Yeah. Amanda, Tess?
I can split up because Amanda and I were going to go in the same one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, let's do 3.
Give me just a minute.
Okay. In the meantime, while Desiree is breaking us out, does anyone else have anything to say? Or Rachel, did you want to continue your question?
Maybe someone has something to say, a quick summary? What is it?
It is an informal peer review board that's being formed, and it's intended for the larger biohacking community, so the community science, DIY bio, the human augmentation, the grinders, the full range of biohackers to be able to have a place to go, to have resources to help them get peer review and to get input at what point in their project. That's one of the things that we were trying to tease out as well, is when would people want to come to it? Would they want to come early and be able to get input on how to design a good experiment, as well as bringing it up for review for the peer review process at the end. And so that there's different levels of exposure at different points. And the conversation has kind of flowed from there. The intention is that it's anyone who needs to have a little bit of that kind of help would be able to get it in terms of design, execution, or review.
So it would be everything from advice to approval. And
That's,
I guess that makes sense, that then it doesn't always have to be open straight out when you're just doing exploratory stuff, trying to figure out if something's even possible.
right.
Okay, I think we're ready to break out. I just wanted to do a note about documents. So the moderators for this group created Rise Up Etherpads, which I think have the links to those have been shared in the chat. But I just wanted to note that this content of this is going to be posted into the Google Docs in the participant drive at the end of this session. So we'll still be able to access them all in one place.
Okay, one quick thing, because I thought I would be with Amanda. Can somebody post the link with our notes so I know what questions we're moderating?
Yeah.
The link should be in the chat.
I just posted it again.
Thank you.
Great.
All
Okay.
right. Shall we?
Yes, please.
All right.
Okay. Everyone's coming back in. Really exciting. So that was a really great, I'll just wait for everyone to start appearing, all the boxes. That was a really great conversation. I know our group had a really good talk. We sorted through a lot of things and a lot of really excellent points got made. So I hope the other two groups were similarly interesting and thought-provoking. And so, just ahead of, breaking out again for the break, we went super over with the last conversation, and I definitely wanted to keep this one on time since the next few talks are individuals, and they're only 15 minutes long. So in the interest of time, let's keep all of the report backs to like 3 minutes or so, and then we'll leave some room open for final thoughts if that's okay. So group one.
I think we were group one. Were we group one?
We were group 2, so maybe.
Okay. I didn't put any notes into the Etherpad. Hopefully some other people did. I'll transfer some over. It was a lot around liability, IP, the ethical standing, putting how much of a burden we'd be putting on the reviewers, and then just some conversation around the self-regulatory pieces. And there was a lot of good information, a lot of great questions. I love the hard questions because that just gives us an opportunity to bring it up to everyone and find some sort of answers before we start going public with it and get whammied.
Okay, that's it. Cool. Okay, very concise. Group 2.
So we were group 2. There were a lot of different concerns that were brought up. There was some concerns about just transparency and making sure there's transparency in the people who will actually be reviewing. And then there were concerns about if this is too broad, who actually is going to be needing this. And so the question became, if it's for human health, are the experts there going to be specifically for human health? Is it for things that will be released in the environment or environmental? Is it for animal health? Then how we actually make sure that those people are part of this. Oh, I'm on the bottom of the screen now. Sorry. And then there was a little bit of conversation about how we make sure that it's the standards and niches for the different projects themselves too, that those are reflected. I'm really hoping I'm not misspeaking for what Nicole was saying, but there's just a need for very specific details with certain projects and specific experts on it that need to be part of that might not be reflected by a general board. I think that was everything.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andy. And hi. Okay, so Rachel, I think you were nominated to share for group 3. So you're muted.
So yeah, we really discussed quite a bunch of interesting things, the different uses that might be for education, for everything from advice to authorization, and whether that might be more useful in a gradual way. I came up with this idea that maybe there should be a sort of advisory board for BioSummit at first. And, if the main aim is to help get resources, then you want one sort of real like institutional resource board. But if you want more like ethical use and risk analysis, then you might want something else. But actually, for the complete discussion, I think I really should say it's after 11 at night for me. And you should say more, Alex, and Justice too. There were a lot of good points, and also from Esther. So why not say something quickly?
Thank you, Rachel. I'll just let Justice, Beth, Esther, anyone else from that group who wants to say anything, go ahead.
I guess I'll take a stab. I think one of the things that certainly shaped my view and my contribution to the conversation, and I think resonated with others, and I resonated sort of back and forth, is this idea that if there is such a board, it's not meant or designed necessarily to gatekeep, as we see has created exclusions for this community, but instead to ensure that there is some semblance of ethics underlying the type of interactions humans are having with biology and biology is having with the world, whether it's social, behavioral, or biological. And I think that's important and to sort of keep on the radar and to surface in the conversations as this gains momentum and structure.
Great. Thank you so much, Justice, and everyone who shared. And thank you so much for, participating in this really important conversation. I think we're all here because we find value in it. I think we're all here because we know that this is a critical topic for the community to discuss. And, I think we're pretty far away from making any decisions or, nailing things down, but every little talk that we have, every time we have an interaction, every time we bring up these issues, it gets a little bit clearer about what this community would like to see and what they might find useful. And Esther brought up a really interesting and I thought really valuable point about providing a service, like what is needed. And what is something that a group like this and fostering a culture like this will do to create a positive force in the community, and what kind of service can it provide? And I think at the heart of this, it's about helping one another, right? It's about, this is a community that has a history of, supporting, lifting up each other and each other's work. And it's a very interdisciplinary community. And I think that it was shown through the conversations we had here today, so many different insights, so many different perspectives, that at the same time, that's what makes it special. And so I was really heartened by the conversations that I heard just now, and I thought that was great. And so I just want to thank every single person here who contributed to this session and the last one about these very hard conversations that are super important. With that, I think Sarah wanted to say something, and I'll let the panelists close out. We got 3 minutes.
I just wanted to remind everyone, if you're interested in this continued conversation, please sign up. And if somebody could post our little website again in the chat, please sign up. There was actually a really good conversation in our group too, and good points to consider. So please consider helping us form this in the future as well. And thank you for helping us form it now.
Awesome. Tessa, Amanda, did either of you want to say anything before we go for a break?
No, just thanks to everyone for participating, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was great hearing from all of you. Feel free to email me if you want to talk more about responsible disclosure, or come to the community days that are coming up in November at the iGEM Jamboree. They're more open than usual, so we'd love to have folks like y'all come and participate in our conversations there too.
So exciting. Awesome. Thank you so much to Tessa and Amanda and Sarah, and to everyone else. Lots of snaps for this group and these very hard conversations. And with
everybody. Thanks,
thank you.
I'm gonna put us on a break. Okay.
All right.
Go drink some water.